So I'd like to welcome our third speaker, which is Dr. Richard Freyer, OBE, who will be speaking on the question, a role for nuclear power in the energy transition. Dr. Richard Freyer has over 35 years of experience in defence, nuclear and policy roles, beginning with a 25-year career in the UK Civil Service, where he contributed to the UK Nuclear Propulsion Programme and the 1998 Strategic Defence Review. He served in roles such as the political advisor to NATO, with NATO in Bosnia, and as a private secretary to the UK Prime Minister. Awarded an OBE in 2000, he joined Bechtel in 2013, leading projects such as the Hanford Waste Treatment Plant and Sellafield Pile fuel cladding silos, all very high-profile projects, and serving as regional president for Asia Pacific region. He holds an MA and a PhD from Oxford University. So please make welcome Dr. Richard Freyer.
Great, Mark. Thank you so much for those very kind words. And it saves me spending a lot of time talking about myself, which I really loathe doing and will be incredibly boring. So that's good. And I'd also like to thank the ANA for inviting me along to speak to you this morning. What I'd like to try and do today, perhaps blending a bit of my experience having worked in the UK government and also with Bechtel over the last sort of 11 years, is to try and sort of offer a perspective on the role that nuclear power can and should play as part of the energy transition and decarbonising the energy sector. Um, I should start perhaps with a few words about Bechtel for those of you who don't not familiar with the company. So we've been around for 126 years. We're still a privately owned, family-run business that focuses on integrated engineering, procurement, and construction. And we operate globally across multiple sectors from oil and gas, infrastructure, nuclear and defence, mining, and manufacturing and technology. The Bechtel's sort of been in Australia now for over 70 years, and have also been active in the nuclear sector for 70 years as well. And in some respects, our history in nuclear kind of almost mirrors the global experience with nuclear power over that period of time. That really through the 1960s, 1970s into the early 1980s, nuclear power was really the flywheel of the whole company, with a sustained long-term build-out, a pipeline of nuclear reactors around the world, particularly, of course, in the US, where we built something like 75% of the nuclear power stations currently active. However, of course, with the accidents at 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, that business very quickly disappeared, which caused the whole company to have to restructure and reorganize. And really, since that time, our real focus has been on trying to sustain our core nuclear engineering, nuclear construction capabilities within the company. Because I think for anyone who's worked in the industry, those skills, once lost, are incredibly hard to recapture. So in 2016, we integrated our nuclear power business with our nuclear government business in the US, precisely to try and sustain and secure those skills for the future, should they be required. And as I'll say in a minute, we definitely feel those skills are going to be required in future. So in terms of what's going on in Bechtel's nuclear world at the moment, as has been mentioned a couple of times today, we recently finished off units 3 and 4 at Vogel in Georgia. Really challenging projects for everyone who's involved, but the first rollout of the AP1000 in the US, and both units now performing well and delivering power to the grid. We've just started construction on the Natrium power plant in Wyoming. This is a facility that integrates TerraPower technology with GE Hitachi's nuclear power generation technology. And it's a prototype reactor designed specifically to integrate with renewables. So it has both a power storage and a power generation capability, and is aimed at smoothing out power supply from intermittent power sources. So a very innovative project, and I think an important part of the future of nuclear power in the US. Elsewhere, we just started work with our partners Westinghouse on the build out of AP1000 in Poland. 3 units are being built there. We're in the early design, construction planning, and supply chain management part of that project. And I'll say a few more words about that approach a little bit later. Elsewhere in the US, we are still deep into some very large non-nuclear power construction projects, including the Hanford Waste Treatment Plant, which I joined in 2013. It started in 2000 and it's still going. So it's a bit of a beast of a project. But also the uranium processing facility at the Y12 complex in Tennessee, which will support both the nuclear security complex and the weapons, the power program in the US. We're also hoping to get the go-ahead for an SMR project for the Tennessee Valley Authority and to start construction on that project in 2026. So kind of a lot going on, and I hope that we will I will bring that sort of 70 odd years of experience to this conversation this morning. That doesn't mean that I'm really here to sort of act as a lobbyist for nuclear power or to try and suggest a particular future power generation mix for Australia. We have a very deep history across the whole power generation sector, and at present here in Australia, we're very active in the solar, the wind, pumped hydro, and indeed combined cycle markets, as well as thinking about the future of other power generation sources. So my aim really is to try and give a sort of both a government and industry perspective from a technology solution neutral perspective of the way in which the energy transition might best be managed and the way in which nuclear might play a part in that. I mean, in some respects, this should be a really simple question. I think most people will accept that nuclear power is pretty much the only source of carbon-free, large-scale, sustained, reliable electricity. And the output from the Nuclear Energy Summit in Brussels earlier this year, where 32 nations committed to trebling their amount of nuclear generation capability by 2050, should be a pretty clear sign of the way that some and many countries are thinking. But of course, the question is a lot more complicated than that. And many countries are having a really deep debate and at quite a sort of emotional level about the way in which nuclear power can and should play a part in the energy transition. So what I'd like to try and do is just sort of offer a few perspectives on some of the kind of key issues that are really driving this debate and the way in which they might be addressed and taken forward going forward. I'm not going to talk very much about safety today. I think that the facts around the safety of the nuclear industry are pretty well established. That doesn't stop different people using those facts to support a very diametrically opposed position on whether nuclear power is a good thing or a bad thing. But I think the facts there are quite clear and can be debated freely. But I think I'd like to really highlight perhaps 4 other issues that I think are really relevant to the debate. I think cost is obviously going to be a really huge issue, and we've heard a bit about that this morning already. I think the big challenge for the nuclear industry is that we don't really have a robust baseline of what a nuclear power station in a developed economy in the 21st century is going to cost to build. We have a lot of quite old data, and we have a lot of data from the 60s and 70s when we were building 2 or 3 a year. We have some data from one-off projects that are taking place now. But I think, if you look around the world, I'm not quite sure that experience in China is particularly relevant to what's happening in developed economies in terms of costs. Clearly, the EPR projects in Finland, the UK, and France have all suffered quite significant challenges from a technical perspective and also from a schedule perspective. And Vogel, which I've mentioned already, it was a really challenging project. I mean, I think there were 3 lead contractors on the project through its lifetime. Westinghouse went bankrupt midway through the project, now happily recovered and in good state. So again, using that as a template, and a baseline to judge the cost of nuclear is perhaps not fair. I think saying that every hydro project is going to be like Snowy 2.0 would be pretty unfair on that industry too. So I think what we really need to try and do, and we hope that that the Poland projects will do this, is try and establish what a baseline cost is for delivering utility scale plants in the current environment. I think there are some grounds for optimism. If you look at plant Vogel, Vogel 4 was delivered 30% more quickly than Vogel 3, showing the real benefits you can get from starting to get into a pipeline of projects rather than doing one-offs. But I think until we've got that sort of really solid baseline of data, making these cost comparisons between solar and nuclear is going to be really, really tough, particularly when people are trying to sort of pull the numbers in a particular direction to suit a particular perspective on what the answer is. I think timelines are really relevant here as well, in terms of how quickly we feel we need to decarbonize energy generation. If the focus is on trying to deliver really, really sharp reductions in carbon emissions by 2030, it's kind of hard to say that nuclear is going to be relevant to that in a really big, meaningful way. And I think from our perspective, we would see that the quickest, cheapest way of impacting that is through replacing coal with liquefied natural gas. But we need a long-term solution that's going to go from reductions to elimination of carbon emissions. And it's hard to see that carbon capture technology is really going to achieve that. And so when we start to think about 2050 and the years beyond that, certainly from our perspective, right now there's not too many other options if you need carbon-free, reliable baseline load to support what's coming out from renewables. Technology choice is also, I think, quite challenging. We understand certain technologies very well, pretty robust. A lot of the new emerging technologies, whether that's the various types of small modular reactors, the various advanced reactor designs, these are all, I think, relatively immature at the moment. There's a lot of people who will advocate for a particular technology, which it's kind of helpful and a good contribution to the debate. But I think for any particular user of nuclear power, there's a really complex mix of issues around about cost, waste, treatment, reliability, safety, a whole bunch of issues. And I think until we get to probably the end of this decade and can really understand the various merits and the pros and cons of each of the different technologies, it's not going to be straightforward for customers and users of nuclear power to make the right technology choice. And again, it's a bit of a cliche, but if I was advising someone thinking about starting a nuclear power program, trying to keep away from the bleeding edge of technology would definitely be one of my first recommendations. But someone's got to be first right, or else we're never going to get anywhere. So waiting for technology to mature, really understanding the trade-offs between the technology types to enable really, really robust decisions on the right technology for a particular application is going to be really important. I think we should also be really conscious that different countries are going to look at this in very, very different ways based on their particular circumstances, whether that's geography, geostrategic situation, or other factors. And perhaps it's worth just saying a couple of words about Taiwan, where I lived for 3 years before moving to Sydney. Taiwan should be, in many ways, the most compelling case anywhere in the world for nuclear power. It's a small island facing some very significant, geostrategic risks. It has a nuclear industry. For those of you who don't know, they built 3 nuclear units in the 1970s, 1980s, but have taken the decision to phase out and end nuclear power by the end of next year. This has not been driven by cost. This is almost entirely being driven by concerns around safety post Fukushima, concerns around waste management and waste disposal on the island, counterbalanced by a very powerful argument around nuclear security, by energy security, given their particular environment. So for now, Taiwan has decided not to pursue and renew nuclear power. But if I was a betting person, I would say that's definitely going to come back onto the agenda there in 5 or 10 years' time, as they think about how they can decarbonize while protecting their energy security. So it's perhaps a slightly extreme example, but I think it's just relevant to understand how local factors are really going to drive individual decisions made by individual countries and individual customers. So I think to kind of try and sort of summarize that briefly. My perspective is that the sheer scale and complexity of the energy transition as we seek to decarbonize the electricity generation sector over the next 20 years is for sure going to require an all of the above approach. I think that there is no one technology is going to solve this, and every technology is going to have a part to play. And I think we have to accept that the precise mix of uh, generating technologies used by any particular country is going to vary depending on a range of these sort of conditions. But nonetheless, we would make the observation that for many countries, nuclear power will be an important part of this choice and this process going forward. What I think is really critical, though, is that whatever major projects are chosen and however whatever investment strategies are used to support the energy transition, what's really critical is that these projects are done successfully and efficiently, because we just are never going to be able to afford it, and we're not going to be able to sustain taxpayer support for this major investment unless projects are being delivered in a predictable, efficient manner. So I'd like to end with just a few observations on some of the challenges around efficient project delivery, particularly as it relates to the nuclear sector. I'm sure many of you have read the "How Big Things Get Done" book. It's one of my favorite books. And in that, it's pretty clear that if you look at by sector, the risks of major cost and schedule overruns, nuclear power comes out number one by a mile in terms of the historic data showing the scale of cost overruns on nuclear projects. If there's anyone from Queensland here, I should say the Olympics comes out second. So if you're a taxpayer in Brisbane, you need to be worried. Um, but so I think there are some real risks in nuclear projects, and so understanding and managing those risks and to ensuring efficient delivery is really critical. So again, as the real mantra of the "How Big Things Get Done" books, we would definitely advocate on these sort of projects. Really plan slow, but then deliver fast. That means an awful lot of upfront thinking around constructability, supply chain resilience, workforce development, design maturity. Um, but then when you press go, building them as fast as you possibly can. And as I'll say in a minute, if you look at cost overruns in nuclear, they're almost all driven by schedule delays causing massive increases in financing costs. Um, Secondly, I think that I would also, and this is going back to Taiwan, an issue there, but to make the scale of investments and to ensure projects run smoothly, they need to have a sustained, solid, stable policy and market environment. And if we're seeing, incentives, changes in the market, or massive outflux in energy policy, it's inevitably going to interrupt delivery and cause delays and therefore cost overruns. So a stable environment of policy making and market dynamics is critical for these projects, which inevitably do take a long time to be successful. I think we need to be really realistic and thoughtful around how we finance these projects and how risk is managed. The simple fact is, particularly for utility scale plants, the sheer scale of the projects and the degree of the risk involved means that inevitably governments are going to have to stand behind it, in my opinion, and expecting construction companies to take on significant risk if there are delays is perhaps unrealistic. That doesn't mean, though, that we should just sit back and not to expect industry and the construction industry to play a role and have some skin in the game in these projects. But getting that right balance between effective incentivization to deliver while not being trying to force too much risk onto the supply chain, which will inevitably lead to very large amounts of contingency being built into prices and then therefore further cost increase. That balance needs to be struck, and it's not an easy one to get right. And I would say from the UK, my UK experience, really figuring out how to finance projects and who ultimately bears the risk if there are schedule delays was the thing that's really caused the most challenge to the whole nuclear programme in the UK. Fourth point, I think this is again really relevant to us right now in Poland and where we are seeking to develop nuclear power in countries who've got no recent history of doing so. is that the capacity and capability of the supply chain is really, really critical. And it's really the thing we're focusing on right now in Poland the most, is identifying Polish companies who are able and interested in participating in the program, going through a detailed program of understanding their quality systems, helping them, train them, develop them, and then certifying that their quality processes are appropriate for nuclear work. We all know nuclear construction is really tough. Doing it safely and doing it in consistent with a nuclear safety case is tough. Doing it in a country where there's no recent nuclear experience is even harder. But doing it efficiently, that's a real challenge. And pulling all that together to enable these projects to go forward well does require significant investment and a very, very hands-on approach to managing the supply chain. As a customer, you can't just sit back and think industry will do this. We as the overall project manager of the project are going to be in there day in, day out, helping the supply chain to be successful because of this lack of deep knowledge in the supply chain. I think the commercial structure for these projects is also really, really critical. The days when you could just write a tender, chuck it over the wall and get lump sum pricing back for design and construction, that's gone. So these projects are going to need much more of a transparent partnership approach between customers and industry. If you look at the supply chain for nuclear power in the US, over 70% of that is delivered through sole source contracts. That's the sort of mindset we need to get into, that this is not going to be driving cost reduction through competition. It's going to be done through partnership, transparency, and really aligned commercial incentives, and getting industry as a real partner in delivering these projects. I think there is something to be said for using technology in the nuclear environment. Generally speaking, nuclear industry can be a little bit conservative. No one wants their big project to be an experiment or a test ground for new technology. But we've been quite thoughtful about how we can take some of the key technologies that made a huge difference in the oil and gas industry, particularly very large-scale offshore modular build and also digital delivery, how that can be applied into the nuclear business. And certainly for both the TerraPower project and for the AP1000 build out in Poland, those will be our first fully digital design, construction, management projects in the nuclear sector. And I think we'll see some real benefits in terms of driving the projects hard to achieve the schedule and the budget. I should perhaps end on a positive note. I probably spent the last 20 odd minutes talking about problems and challenges and difficulties, but we shouldn't actually be too gloomy. Just an hour away from where we're sitting today, the first new airport in Australia that's been built for generations is being built by a supply chain with very little experience of building terminals and runways. That airport is going ahead on budget, on cost. We're 90% complete, and it will open successfully in 2026. So, Australia can do these things. There is an amazing capacity to drive and deliver projects in Australia. And I think that we can have a degree of confidence that if we get some of these fundamentals of project delivery right, that these projects can be successful. That's all I want to say. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.